On the morning of September 19, 1985, an earthquake began offshore Mexico, over 350 kilometers from the capital. By the time it arrived beneath Mexico City, something extraordinary and catastrophic happened. The ground started moving, not with the brief, sharp jolt of normal seismic shaking, but with a deep, slow, rolling oscillation that lasted over 3 minutes. Buildings that had survived hundreds of smaller earthquakes began to sway. And then, in a pattern that engineers watching from the outside could not initially explain, certain city blocks collapsed completely while the blocks right next to them were untouched. The earthquake wasn't choosing where to destroy. The ground beneath the city was. Over 10,000 people died. More than 400 buildings collapsed. And the mechanism that killed them, the reason a magnitude 8.0 earthquake centered 350 kilometers away could selectively destroy specific neighborhoods in a city that never felt the primary shaking, is the same mechanism that is waiting beneath Mexico City right now. The same mechanism that amplified the Venezuela doublet and turned Caracas into rubble. Except in Mexico City, the scale is not larger by a factor of 2 or 5 or 10. Scientists have measured the amplification factor of seismic waves in Mexico City's lake zone at up to 50 times baseline. 22 million people live above it. Mexico City was built on a ghost. The ghost of Lake Texcoco, a vast, shallow lake that covered roughly 700 square kilometers of the central Mexican plateau during Aztec times, and that the Spanish colonial government spent 3 centuries systematically draining. By the end of the 18th century, the lake had shrunk to a fraction of its original size. By the 20th century, it was almost entirely gone, replaced by streets, neighborhoods, metro lines, airports, government buildings, and the homes of what would become the largest Spanish-speaking city on Earth. But the lake did not disappear beneath the city. It left something behind. Saturated clay sediments, soft, waterlogged, extremely fine-grained material, deposited over thousands of years on the original lake floor, now buried beneath the urban surface, still present, still saturated, still behaving exactly as they did when water covered them. In some parts of Mexico City, this clay layer extends 60 meters below street level. And it is not static. The extraction of groundwater from beneath the city has caused Mexico City to sink, in some areas by as much as 10 meters over the past century, at rates of up to 30 centimeters per year in the most affected zones. The city is not just built on a lakebed, it is slowly descending back into it, compressing the very clay that amplifies the earthquakes coming for it from the coast. Its shear wave velocity, the speed at which seismic energy moves through it, is between 40 and 90 meters per second. For comparison, the bedrock surrounding the basin transmits seismic energy at velocities of 1,500 meters per second or more. That ratio is the mechanism. When seismic waves enter the lake zone clay from the surrounding bedrock, they slow dramatically, and in slowing, they amplify. The same energy, compressed into a slower medium, becomes taller, longer, and more destructive. The soft clay also resonates. It vibrates at its own natural frequency, and when the incoming seismic wave matches that frequency, the shaking is not just amplified, it is sustained. In 1985, the ground in Mexico City's lake zone vibrated at intense levels for over 3 minutes. That duration is what killed the buildings. Not just the peak force, but the relentless cycling of force, back and forth, for 180 seconds, until structural members fatigued and connections failed. This is not a historical curiosity. It is the current state of 22 million people's geological reality. A 2025 study published in the Bulletin of the Seismological Society of America modeled what would happen to Mexico City's building stock under a series of moderate, locally generated earthquakes, not the massive subduction events that caused 1985, but smaller, shallower crustal earthquakes originating directly beneath the city itself. Their findings were sobering. A magnitude 5.5 earthquake in the Juan de Aragon lake zone would damage 15% of 1 to 2-story buildings in the area purely from local amplification effects, not from proximity to the epicenter, from the soil. Lead author Gerardo Suarez stated the lesson clearly. Seismic risk in Mexico City stems not only from large subduction earthquakes, but from local crustal sources that, although rare, may cause substantial damage. Stop for a moment. A magnitude 5.5 earthquake is not a catastrophic event. It would barely register as a significant earthquake in California. In Mexico City's lake zone, it can damage 1 in 7 low-rise buildings, before the city has even encountered the scenario it was built to fear. That scenario is the Guerrero Gap. Offshore Mexico, along the Pacific coast of the state of Guerrero, the Cocos Plate subducts beneath the North American plate at a rate of approximately 6 centimeters per year. This subduction zone, the Middle America Trench, generates the most powerful earthquakes in Mexico's history, including the 1985 event that killed thousands in a city more than 350 kilometers from the rupture zone. But one segment of this subduction boundary has not ruptured in a major earthquake in living memory. Scientists call it the Guerrero Gap, a 350-kilometer section of the subduction interface that has been accumulating strain without a major release since at least the early 20th century. The gap is not inactive, it is locked. GPS measurements show the coastal zone above it being dragged inland and downward by the friction of the subducting plate, a process called elastic strain accumulation. When that locked interface eventually slips, the stored elastic energy releases in a matter of minutes. The 1985 earthquake occurred on a segment adjacent to the Guerrero Gap, not on the gap itself. What the Guerrero Gap is capable of producing when it finally ruptures, after a century or more of accumulation, is a question Mexican seismologists have been studying with increasing urgency. The answer, based on the length of the locked zone and the rate of plate convergence, involves a magnitude somewhere between 7.5 and 8.5. Now combine that with the lake zone clay, and the amplification factor of 50, and 22 million people, and building stock that, despite major improvements after 1985 and again after 2017, still contains hundreds of thousands of structures built before modern seismic codes existed, many of them in the lake zone where the amplification is worst. The 2017 Puebla earthquake was a magnitude 7.1. It struck not on the Guerrero Gap, not on the subduction interface, but from a completely different mechanism, an intraslab event occurring 57 kilometers below the surface. It killed 370 people in Mexico City. It collapsed 38 buildings. It damaged over 6,000 structures across the metropolitan area. And it occurred, by pure coincidence, on September 19th, the 32nd anniversary of the 1985 earthquake, hours after the annual national earthquake drill that commemorates it. The city that had drilled for an earthquake that morning was shaking before the drill sirens had gone silent. That coincidence was not lost on the 22 million people who felt the ground move beneath them. It was the third time in Mexico City's modern history that September 19th had produced a major seismic event, a statistical anomaly that seismologists are careful to describe as coincidence, but that has become burned into the city's collective memory as something darker. As if the date itself were the warning. 370 people from a magnitude 7.1 intraslab event. A Guerrero Gap rupture would not be magnitude 7.1. And it would not be intraslab. Venezuela showed the world what the combination of soft sediment amplification, inadequate building stock, and an overdue fault system looks like when it finally moves. Caracas sits on a sedimentary basin. The buildings that collapsed were non-ductile concrete built before seismic codes required adequate reinforcement. The fault had not ruptured at this magnitude in 125 years. Scientists knew all of these things before June 24, 2026. The combination moved anyway. Mexico City's sedimentary basin is not comparable to Caracas's in scale. It is larger. The amplification factor is not similar. It is higher. The fault system offshore is not in the same geological category. It is a full subduction zone, capable of producing earthquakes that Caracas's strike-slip boundary cannot match. And the city above it is not smaller than Caracas. It is 8 times larger. What happened in Venezuela was not a unique geological event. It was a demonstration in real time with real casualties, with satellite imagery and seismograph records and engineering reports of exactly what happens when the geological conditions beneath a major city finally align with the fault system they have been waiting for. The demonstration was 2,595 confirmed dead and counting. The conditions beneath Mexico City are more severe. The city is larger, and the fault that scientists are watching most closely off the coast of Guerrero has not moved in over a century. The signal seismologists monitor in the Guerrero Gap is called interseismic coupling, the degree to which the two plates are locked versus creeping. Current measurements show the central Guerrero segment is strongly coupled. The energy is not releasing gradually, it is storing. And every year that passes without a major Guerrero Gap earthquake is a year of additional accumulation, in a city where the ground itself will multiply whatever arrives by a factor of up to 50. The lake is gone. What it left behind is not. Subscribe to Seismic Alert. We will keep watching what builds beneath the city.